The French president's worries about Russian influence in Africa have garnered attention and conversation in recent times. As Russia expands its influence on the African continent, France, as a former colonial power in many African countries, has expressed apprehension about the implications of this growing presence. In a turnout of events, Vladimir Putin has addressed Macron's concerns over Russian presence in Africa. So, in this video, we will see why Macron is worried about Russian presence in Africa. We will also see what Vladimir Putin has done to shut the mouth of the French leader. Make sure you watch this video to the end to get a full understanding. Emmanuel Macron is worried about several things. First, concerns regarding the possible destabilization of the region have been aroused by Russia's expanded military cooperation and arms sales to African nations. Russia supplied 6 second-hand Czech-built Aero L-39s to the Central African Republic in May 2023 and has completed the delivery of 18 Kazan Ansat helicopters to Zimbabwe. Despite war with Ukraine, Russia has overtaken China as the major arms supplier to Sub-Saharan African militaries. France views this as a threat to its own power and security interests given its historical ties and military presence in Africa. Macron has also voiced concerns about Russia's backing of dictatorial governments and how it can sabotage democratic processes in African countries. There was no surprise when military leaders in Niger reached out to Russia's mercenary Wagner group for help just days after overthrowing a democratically elected government and suspending the country's constitution. France says Russia's presence in Africa is focused on promoting autocracy and instability. Niger is simply the latest example. For 2 decades, Russia has employed a strategy of enabling and protecting authoritarian regimes while undermining democracy in every region in Africa. Joseph Siegel, director of research at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies, even called it a counter-revolutionary strategy in which authoritarian regimes avert government checks and balances to benefit themselves politically and financially. Siegel traces the roots of Russia's strategy in Africa to the winter of 2011 to 2012, when protests against President Vladimir Putin swept through large cities such as Moscow and fueled Putin's paranoia and determination to quash any opposition voices. The Russian Federation's economic involvement in Africa is another area of worry, according to France. French economic interests have been threatened by the increasing influence of Russian businesses in industries including mining, energy, and infrastructure development. Bear in mind that the military government of Burkina Faso and Russia's state-owned nuclear company Rosatom signed a memorandum of understanding to build a nuclear power plant to boost energy supply in the West African state. The agreement follows a request from Burkina Faso's military leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, to Russian President Vladimir Putin during the Russia-Africa summit held in St. Petersburg in July. We should note that France has always maintained close economic links with its former colonies. The French president has stressed the value of openness and fair competition in trade with African nations. But have they been doing so over the years? Why are they suddenly interested in what Russia has to offer to Africans? Macron has also expressed alarm over Russia's use of misinformation and disinformation efforts in Africa. The French are concerned that Russia may manipulate public opinion and foment discontent in African societies as it increases its media presence and power, thereby weakening stability and escalating already existing conflicts. France has attempted to increase its own political and economic ties in Africa in response to these worries. The French government has placed a high priority on upholding solid alliances with African nations and advancing human rights, democracy, and sustainable development. To counteract Russia's influence in Africa, France has likewise advocated for more European Union involvement there. The truth is that Africans are already fed up with the French and want little or nothing to do with them. Vladimir Putin has clearly been observing all that is going on from the back. He has zoomed in on his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron and his vocal criticism of Moscow's war on Ukraine, arguing that this emotional reaction by the French president is due to resentment at losing allies in Africa to the Kremlin. Putin said that Russia did not go into Africa and force France out, and that Macron's main problem has something to do with the fact that Wagner is a Russian organization. The Russian leader also said that he was not inciting anyone and was not setting anyone up against France. Macron has been one of the most outspoken critics of Russia in recent weeks, declaring that French support for Kiev knew no bounds and exhorting others not to be cowards. However, Putin believes that the French president's very strong and emotional response is related to the events occurring in African nations, among other things. One thing to note here is that Putin has nothing against Macron. He is just sharing his thoughts from his point of view. In recent years, Russia has built strong relationships with many African countries, including Mali, Burkina Faso, and Algeria. This has been driven by both geopolitical and economic factors, as Moscow seeks to strengthen its presence in the region. As a result, Russia's weapons deliveries to African militaries have increased significantly. Weapons supplied by Russia to African militaries include a wide range of military equipment, from small arms and ammunition to tanks and anti-aircraft systems. Moscow has also supplied the African Union with military hardware and training programs, further demonstrating its commitment to the region. As all this is going on, President Vladimir Putin has told the West that Russia was technically ready for nuclear war, and that if the US sent troops to Ukraine, it would be considered a significant escalation of the conflict. Putin, speaking ahead of a March 15 to 17 election, which is certain to give him another 6 years in power, added that the nuclear war scenario was not rushing up, and he saw no need for the use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine. He stated that the United States was aware that Russia would view the deployment of American forces as an intervention if they were made on Russian soil or in Ukraine. 4 regions of Ukraine, according to Moscow, have been annexed and are now a part of Russia. Although the Biden administration has stated that it does not have any intentions to send soldiers to Ukraine, it has emphasized the importance of passing a security aid bill that has been sitting on the shelf to provide the Ukrainian military with the armaments they need to fight the conflict, which is currently in its 3rd year. President Emmanuel Macron, on the other hand, has urged Europeans to not be weak and to prepare for action, labeling President Vladimir Putin's Russia as an enemy that would not stop in Ukraine if it defeated Kyiv's army in the 2-year-old conflict. Last month, Macron indicated he could not rule out the deployment of ground troops in Ukraine. Many politicians, particularly in Eastern Europe, distanced themselves from that, while others voiced support. The strategic interests of France and Russia have diverged so much that Russia is no longer constrained by its previous priorities of European cooperation. Ever since Bazoum was overthrown, demonstrators waving Russian flags and condemning France for embezzling their country's riches have taken to the streets. The Niger coup is a harsh slap in the face for France, following the coups in Mali and Burkina Faso. Macron intended to restructure his policy in the African Sahel region by relying on Niger and Chad, the final 2 of France's principal strategic allies in the area. The French used to enslave and despise Africans. It is worth remembering what former French President Nicolas Sarkozy said years ago. The tragedy of Africa is that the Africans have not fully entered into history. They have never really launched themselves into the future. Such egregious racism revealed the real nature of French colonialism and the lies that were spread to support its colonization of 20 African nations. It had stated that it was carrying out the so-called white man's burden by advancing civilization. This French trajectory of development and wealth presented Paris as the epicenter of light and liberty, but in reality, France took the lives of millions of Africans and established human zoos and museums, housing nude Africans for the amusement of free French citizens. Take note that Russian President Vladimir Putin was eager for the Russian-African Summit in St. Petersburg to redefine Russia's relationship with Africa and increase its political and economic influence on the continent. He has also sent free grain shipments to 6 African nations. In addition, he alluded to the hope that the African Union will become a full member of the G20, emphasizing that Moscow is anticipating this to happen in September. In exchange, African countries are seeking to explore opportunities for cooperation with Russia in various fields and obtain Russian support in development, infrastructure, and security issues. France, which still rules the Francophone world, is a ferocious defender of its power in Africa and a symbol of the traditional Western colonial camp. Russia aims to penetrate the continent to increase its power and is a symbol of contemporary colonialism. African nations are divided into two factions: those who embrace Russia, the people's ally, and those who yearn for the servitude of the former colonizer, France, the nation's protector. As all of this is going on, democracy has become a slave system between the illiterate and the hungry, forcing the former to submit to Russia and the latter to France. The French president's worries about Russian influence in Africa draw attention to the intricate dynamics at work in the area. France is cautious about Russia's growing influence and its possible effects on French interests because it was formerly a colonial power, with historical ties to many African nations. France sees Russia's military activities and arms sales as a potential threat to regional stability and its own security interests. The growing presence of Russian companies in key sectors also raises concerns about competition and the potential impact on French economic interests. Do you think all that Russia is doing is just a strategy to completely remove the West from Africa and work as the sole controller? Which other strategy should Africans be expecting from Russia? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the New Tourist channel. Turn on notifications too so you get notified whenever we upload videos like this. Thanks for watching and see you in our next video.